So we are back with a final thoughts on Dawn of Sorrow. I guess if I had to summarize it in a short sentence, it would be, sadly, it was not as fun as I remember it to be. Or more accurately, I remember it not being fun, but in some ways it was worse. Maybe that's the best way to phrase it. I think the big detractor of the game, and we're gonna jump straight into it, are the seals. I absolutely do not think seals should have been a thing in this game. The fact that you have to stop every time you beat a boss, and you have to draw a magic symbol on the screen, and if you mess up, it revives the boss, really makes certain bosses very, very tedious, especially on the more complicated drawings. So, absolutely not a fan. I do not blame for people that have done ROM hacks of the game to remove it and make it automatic, because it is a feature I will never miss, I will never be nostalgic for. Good riddance, let it never be in another Castlevania game or another game like this in the future. Awful, just awful. But let's talk about something else other than the elephant in the room of the seals. Let's talk about the feel of the game. So, going through the game, one thing that's immediately obvious as we play through is that there is just absolutely atrocious drop rates of souls in Dawn of Sorrow. So in a game that encourages you to use different kinds of attacks in order to clear your way through the dungeon, it is just disappointing that the more common souls of the game are just so absurdly bad. Like, we were using things like Skeleton Bone, which is one of the starting ones, pretty much for like a third of the game. And then we managed to get a couple of required souls. But yeah, for those that might not have seen the earlier parts, as a reminder, some of the drop rates to access optional areas in this game, like Bone Arc or Skeleton Ape, have a 0.59% drop rate and a 0.78% drop rate. For something in order to access the full castle, those are required. You're also required to farm several souls, kind of like an Aria, in order to get to the true ending. Those are not completely horrendous. Like, for example, we fought Ukabak, which has about a 3% drop rate. Like, those are not great. You could reasonably kill 20 or so without it being super tedious if you're going back and forth between areas. But I just feel, in general, that the overall drop rates are just so much lower. Like, outside of the first two areas, the drop rates just dive off a cliff. Like, we basically didn't see a soul after a certain point in the game. We got one of the more annoying souls to get, if I recall correctly. Although apparently Black Panther has a 12% drop rate, so never mind. We got the most common soul in the game, apparently. Who would have thought, chat? we actually got it in 2 tries. But for a lot of the other ones, we just never got to see what they did. So I feel like it's just kind of an unfortunate design of what they chose to do. They got rid of something for the most part outside of, like, I think 2 areas where there were a lot of soul canisters in the previous game where there would just be guaranteed soul drops throughout. I believe the bosses in this game do drop guaranteed soul drops based off of what I'm looking up as we're speaking. So at least there's that. There's some guaranteed damage. But I definitely feel like there's a big issue with power throughout the game. The game feels a lot more awkward to do combat with because they're trying to stop you from doing a lot of backdash canceling. So it's still possible in this game. It's just not usually worth it, and or is definitely more technically demanding than in the previous game. So it's not very beginner friendly for sure. We basically stopped doing damage to bosses about midway through the game. Our damage scaling on melee fell off a cliff, and I think a lot of that has to do with, like, the design philosophy of the game. So instead of getting static numbers that buff your strength, like in the prior game, because this game is a sequel, I guess I should have mentioned, this particular one decides that you have to grind multiple souls in order to power them up, which sounds interesting in concept. It's not bad by itself. The problem is that the drop rate of the souls are so bad. So if you want to max like a single ability, even if it has like a 4% drop rate, like, right, let's just take like a moderately high drop rate for this game of 4%, that you're dealing upwards of 25 deaths on average per soul, times however many levels that soul needs to power up. So if it has 3 levels, you're doing 75 kills minimum to get it to max strength. And just things of that nature. We've gone through and we've killed upwards of like 40 to 50 and not seen a single soul. There's some that have drop rates as low as 1%. And we've seen enemies that have level ups as high as level 9. And it just doesn't really seem realistic. Like that, it's pretty much in there for like the uber grinders. And unfortunately, instead of offering a lot of really strong weapons throughout, which I think was a good design philosophy from the prior game, most of the weapons seem to be locked behind the synthesis, which also requires you to get souls. So it's really counterintuitive. So it's like, if I want more damage, I have to give up the already annoying grinded souls in order to just do more damage to grind more souls. So ultimately, we just ignored that entire mechanic in the game. It was maybe useful once, but we really didn't feel like fighting a bazillion wargs just to get another upgrade. So we honestly did not touch it for a majority of the game. Like, literally, we looked at it at the beginning, went, I don't feel like wasting time fighting this warg, and we moved on. So I'm sure there are some strong weapons. I've seen them before in randomizers. It's just a shame that that's how they decide they want to dole out some of the better weapons. Mixed with the fact that some of those combined weapons are absolutely atrocious, I just feel doesn't make any sense. I think the fact that one of the weapons requires a boss soul, which you can only get, which by definition you only fight the bosses once, and you have to give up a potentially really strong ability for a very mediocre weapon, to me is bonkers. I don't think boss souls should not have been required for anything. Imagine needing to New Game Plus just to get all the souls and weapons, just because you're only allowed to have one. Yeah, the game is a mess of poor decisions. I definitely feel like, even from the story perspective, it's supposed to take a year after the previous story. And man, the characterizations of Hammer in particular were just painful to read through. So even from like a story perspective, I was just like rolling my eyes and or just going audibly like, ugh, while going through the story, because the dialogue was just so bad. And not in like an entertaining bad way. Like, there's only so much I can take of Hammer gushing about Yoko talking to him. There's only so much I can handle, chat. There really is. It's like his one character trait. I think there's also, I don't want to go further than that. That's more spoiler territory. We'll circle back on that point when we go into full-on spoilers. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like in general, the weapon types in this game were just kind of eh. I don't feel like we ever got a weapon that felt supremely powerful, and I think that's definitely a problem coming from prior games, in particular Aria, which is the direct prequel to this game, where, you know, the katana was nice and all, but it stopped dealing damage. Like, we ended at around, I think, 51 power at most on a heavy weapon, where in Aria we were upwards of like 100, 110, 120, depending on what our setup was. And it didn't really require grinding to do it. So the level of power felt much lower in this game. And combined with the fact that failing a seal requires you to redo bosses, and you're not doing like a bazillion points of damage, feels really bad from a casual perspective. Unless your casual perspective is you want to grind every soul, then good luck. It's going to take you probably like, I don't know, without an efficient plan, I imagine upwards of 30 hours. For people really comfortable with the game, I'm sure they could do it in like 4 to 5 hours, but this is also requiring a lot of tech, I think, and also some luck, because I think it's really weird that some of the movement tech in the game in particular is locked so late. Like, I don't consider this a spoiler, but like, for example, Black Panther, which is the speed up soul, is available like 4 rooms before we beat the game. Or like our super jump is available only in the final area of the game. So backtracking and doing all those other things is just kind of, So, I don't know. I can't imagine trying to full unlock the weapons in Souls. I guess if you did Souls, it would take less time. But trying to get enough souls to also get the weapons, just, And then imagining to New Game Plus, just, I don't know, chan. I do feel like the drops were actually mostly okay in the beginning half of the game, but somewhere in the later half of the game, we stopped seeing like any noticeable upgrade. Like, we had a good armor drop, but we never got like a super accessory. We didn't even come remotely close to a powerful weapon by the end of the game. I think our main attack was doing like 40 total damage, which is bonkers in a Castlevania game. Like, just think about how strong like Alucard was at the end of his playthrough, or in Aria, just playing with the same character. We were doing like 150 plus total damage due to our soul combinations. Or even the Game Boy games where we're doing upwards of 80 damage a tick. So this definitely felt like on the super low end of damage. And maybe some of it is perception, like the boss's health isn't super high. But when you go in a game kind of style where you normally hit triple digits well before the end of the game, to be below half of that, it also unfortunately taints the playthrough. At least for me it did, where I felt like my damage was nothing. I think in particular that that one fight before the final boss with the absolute jank mechanics and the fact that we hit that thing for like probably 1,000 something damage and only doing 40 a hit was painful. Painful, chat. Not a big fan. So I guess from the standpoint, we'll try to talk about positives. I guess the maps were helpful. It is the dual screen, so I can have the map open, so I didn't really feel super lost at any point in the game. The music is solid. I don't think I would listen to a majority of it outside of the game itself, but I think it served its purpose. There's a lot of gimmick modes that are included with the game. Most of them require you to beat the game. Like, there's the classic boss rush mode. You can do one where you set enemies up based off the enemies you've killed to do your, like, a little mini gauntlet for you or your friends. Yeah, the faces are very expressive, which was entertaining. I don't know how much of it was supposed to be entertaining in that sense, but I did like that they were there. I like basically nothing about the story. I wasn't a fan of the combat. Honestly, most of the bosses I didn't really enjoy. And it's not because, like, the bosses were necessarily hard, it's just that they were more tedious, and I think that was due to the damage levels. Without having an ability to damage stack, like in other Castlevania games, or having, like, this outright OP weapon, we end up just spending, like, 5 to 8 minutes in some of those boss fights, and it takes forever. And I'm just not a big fan of boss fights that start taking over even 3 minutes. Like, that's a long time to just be dodging over and over and over. And every time you fail a seal, it adds like 20 to 40 seconds, depending on the boss. Just not the best. I do feel like from a difficulty standpoint, I feel like the very beginning of the game went from like one of the easiest bosses in the game to one of the most punishing bosses in the game. And that felt really awkward. What was his name? Balor? I always forget the name of the boss. The guy with the giant fist and the laser face. I just feel like he is just so high damaging and so punishing. It feels weird that he's an early boss. And then there's other bosses in the game where we no-hit them because they're so easy even without souls. So there's definitely like a boss balancing issue with the game. And I don't think it's player skill. Like, there's genuinely something wrong with some of the bosses. Like, compare, like, the absolute jank of some of the later bosses, or, like, the mostly fair and telegraphed moves of the boss in the Curse Tower, for example, versus, like, Versus like some of the other crazy things. Like the time stop boss was borderline. Like fairly easy pattern, but you had to react quickly. And then unfortunately a lot of the difficulty I feel like they find in the bosses ends up more being let's flood the screen with nonsense. I feel like there were several bosses that followed that philosophy, including the final boss, where there's not an individually fast attack or like an uncertain pattern. It's just a constant stream of things happening. So those kinds of boss styles are definitely not mine. Maybe some people enjoy that. I'm definitely not an enjoyer of that. Especially for people that don't like fighting the equivalency of ads/minions in a boss fight. There were quite a few of those in this game, where we had to deal with something else in order to deal with the main boss itself. So, very mixed feelings about it. I guess from my standpoint, if we had to, before we go into spoilers, would I ever consider playing the game again? Probably not. Would I consider playing again with seals removed? No, because I still had a lot of problems with the game aside from that issue. I mean, don't get me wrong, that was a big issue. That definitely put me in a bad mood at several points. But I think the big issue too is just I feel like even just the level design was just not as good as the other Castlevanias. Like, there's nothing wrong with the size of the castle or like the progression. Like, the flow of the castle was fine. The level design themselves per room was not good. So like, I'll give a great example. I do not want to do a puzzle room in order to make progress. I do not want to do a slider puzzle in order to rearrange the rooms in a mandatory area. I do not want to draw on the screen to delete ice blocks in order to progress. I don't like going through long hallways that have nothing at the end of them. No health ups, no treasures. There were a lot of places where we just kind of dropped down and it was like, haha, gotcha, we put a big enemy just off screen. So if you were doing anything other than slow fall, you're gonna take damage instantly. So, and there's also points where like we were climbing a tower, and then after you beat the boss of the tower, you gotta climb the tower again to get the item, instead of just giving you like an elevator or a shortcut back. Like, there's a lot of really weird decisions with the way the rooms were structured, both in like enemy placement and just where it expects you to go next. So it's not that it was confusing or that there weren't choices throughout the game. It's just that some of the things to do were just like, ugh. Just, I don't know. Like, Clock Tower was fairly challenging, for example, but not like the worst one ever we've seen in a game. Oh, chat's quoting my famous phrase, more or less, of just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah, there were a lot of gimmicks in this game, and most of them just did not work for me. Like, weapon synthesis I did not like it as a mechanic. I like the idea of having, like, rare enemies that can only be summoned by having certain souls. But, like, if then the odds of getting it are so low that you have to kill, like, 50 plus just to get a soul, just, I don't know. It just kind of ruins it for me. So I think this game made me kind of retroactively not like Aria, and I'm glad I replayed Aria to say that I actually liked it now that I went to it. But yeah, I don't think my opinion on this game has changed at all. I think the way I felt playing this growing up did not change even slightly. In fact, I like it less. I like it less on the replay, because I'm like, wow, Aria was just so much better. It's like, oh my gosh, what a shame. Yeah, I agree with Calvisham. Like, there are certain bosses that make you go in, like, projectile pattern mode before you can hit them. But I just find it kind of annoying to deal with, like, the ads. And it just adds to the boss fight. It's not, like, fun or necessarily challenging. It's just kind of, like, busy work to stop you from dealing with the bosses. Neat concept, poor execution. I'm really curious what people would do to really fix the problems of this in general. Like, other than obviously addressing the soul drop rate, which is atrocious. Oh, and as per usual in classic Castlevania fashion, luck doesn't work, of course. Roll your eyes, John. So, I don't know. there's just a lot of enemies that kind of hit you off screen throughout. I think the biggest example are the skeleton apes, where you jump like maybe 2 character widths into a room and they instantly attack you. We've had stuff strike us from basically off screen, or they're activated off screen. Like, I could think of an example, like we're outside the tower and we're just climbing vertically, and suddenly the skeleton dragon, which is ridden by the flea rider, which is confusingly called Quetzalcoatl, which I remember because I was like, why is that a Quetzalcoatl? How does anything that we're looking at remind you of Quetzalcoatl? That would just fall on you randomly as you go up and down. It's just like, it's just weird decisions like that. Or like, no, I think it's just weird decisions like that. There's a lot of stuff that just kind of falls on you from off screen. Or as I said before, like the bone dragons will shoot stuff off screen before you see them. Where you might activate them by like a pixel, and then they'll like fire at you even though you're fighting other things. The UMAs were a neat concept. Yeah, I agree. I firmly agree with. I think it's definitely marred by just like the core gameplay, where if souls were more accessible and some of the souls were rebalanced a little bit, that would have been interesting. Like, for example, we got 1 soul that we used for more than half of the game because nothing even came close to damaging it. And I think a big issue that we were seeing from the souls that we collected, like, who knows, maybe not in an overall experience, maybe you get better options, but we had, like, nothing to anti-air with almost the entirety of the game. Like, we had axe armor, axe, and that was literally it. We had nothing that would hit stuff above us other than axe armor. So it felt really bad to have so many ground-based abilities, and then halfway through the game, everything flies. Like, think about it, chat. Think about how many flying bosses there were in this game compared to the other games. And then think of how many abilities we just straight up couldn't use in the air or would not hit high enough. From, like, the 20 to 25 attack souls we got. Like, we literally got, I think, uppercut, axe. If you want to count card, I guess, but you can't dash cancel it in the air. So it doesn't really do that much damage. So, I don't know. It's just very strange to me to have those kinds of, I would say, enemy types mixed with the souls. Like, where were our super strong spear abilities or, like, floating attacks? Like, the closest we came, I guess, was the Warg, but that was also extremely close range. When if you're that close range to begin with, then it's like, you're just gonna be meleeing then instead of using the soul. Whereas, like, axe, we could chuck, and while it's out, we could do some attacks and rack up the damage. So there were some basic abilities that were worth it, and I think it tried to make them required. Maybe that was the intent, to make you have required souls so that way you would have some options for the later bosses. I'm gonna guess that's what their intent was. But honestly, I didn't really see a point in using anything other than the axe. That would have been our backup had we not received the I'll call it the Locust attack from Abaddon. But yeah, it just felt like in general, because they gated off a lot of the stat boosters, like we found literally only strength up the whole game. We didn't find int up, we didn't find MP regen. We found like almost nothing in the support skills side. It was actually kind of sad, a few abilities we got by the end of the game. So because of that, our build was basically, you have to melee, but then melee falls off after a while, and you're like, man, if only I had more items. So the game ends up just being like an MP potion spam fest, which I don't find as interesting. And definitely flip that compared to like our other playthroughs. Like, how much did I spam items in boss fights in the earlier Castlevanias compared to this one? I feel like this one was like on its own tier. Like, I was using upwards of like 20 items in a fight. And I feel like even in some of the final boss fights of the other games, I didn't even come remotely close to that. It was mostly just because we just needed so much MP to do any real, like, chance of damaging a boss. And again, that goes into the feeling of being weak thing we talked about before. But anyway, chat, we're gonna switch over to spoiler territory. So for people that want to give their final non-spoiler thoughts, feel free to insert some comments here. I guess one last thing I'll say is that, you know, from the DS side of things, gimmicks that worked. I liked seeing the map at the bottom as the alternate screen, but I liked pressing the button to see the enemy bestiary without opening up the bestiary. I thought that was a nice touch. Hopefully the later handheld games that are 2-screen also do that. I think that was like one of the only things that I would recommend they bring over to the next game. Hopefully the drop rates in future games are not that terrible. And we'll see where it goes from there. I don't see chat saying anything here, so I'll give chat just a few more seconds if they want to do non-spoiler stuff. But I think from the standpoint of the castle itself, it wasn't my least favorite castle, but some of the enemy placements were super questionable, and they felt borderline unfair in some rooms. And I think that has to do with the fact that they activate from like being a pixel on screen, or the fact that they just fall randomly onto you, or you go downwards at a very vertical section and it just punishes you. Is they put an enemy right where you want to land naturally. Just kind of stuff like that kind of detracts from the game. In particular when it already wants you to grind so much for weapons and items and such in order to do real damage. But anyway, chat, let's go to spoilers. Abaddon. Oh, actually, I think I said I like to say non-spoiler stuff. Puzzles and screen completion were not good. Some ideas sounded okay, but overall didn't work out. There were some Souls that had touchscreen integration, but we never used them. / we never found them. I will make a comment. I think there's one with like, it might be a Laura Une. It's one where you summon it, it's a plant boss thing, and it shoots vines upwards, but if you tap the screen, it targets the vines. So there are some implementations with the touchscreen that are optional, which I think are interesting. But again, due to the way the game worked, we literally never saw it in our playthrough. So I'll mention it. You know, there are some interesting mechanics, I guess. But thanks, Soul Drop Rate. And you give the double thumbs up. Like, we never found it. So whatever. From a spoiler standpoint, man, Abaddon might be one of the jankiest bosses we fought in a while. Those locusts mixed with his RNG jumps. Combine that with my least... Oh, I forgot to put that in the non-spoilers. But man, the bat form of this character... Awful. Awful. Please tell me in other games. I don't think it's in... No, there is a flying form in Portrait of Ruin. Never mind. Please tell me in future games the flight mechanic is not that janky. I think it's so stupid. You do like a vertical flip upwards and you basically double your hurt box size. It just... Why? Why do they increase your hurt box by so much? And they make you go upwards with it too, which is the worst feeling. If chat is wondering why I kept bonking, it's because you literally go upwards, even if you're holding downwards. So it's not like Soten, where like if you do a bat and you're holding forward, you bat forward. Imagine that, but no iframes. So it's like, it just moves you upwards and you could be hit and it just hits you out of the mode. I feel like that's one of the dumbest decisions in the game. That definitely made me kind of irritated at the movement in the game in general. I think there's some interesting things with the dive kick, like sliding off of ledges into dive kicks. That was fun, I guess. Oh yeah, when Abaddon decided to attack us by pointing his thing off screen and not showing us the pattern, that was actually some BS. I hope somebody goes and clips it after the stream. If not, I'll go clip it at some point, because that was actually just BS. Where like the whole visual cue of the boss where he's a conductor and he waves the wand, but he put the wand off screen. Like, wow. 0 out of 10 on that boss design for sure. Least favorite fight, mostly due to jank. So combine his random patterns with random jump and the fact that the locusts sometimes hit you more than once is insane. I love how I can go from like one attack dodging the same way. I could be like 3 or 4 pixels in any given direction, and I could be hit anywhere between 1 and 3 times on that boss fight. Or did you like when I got stun locked and died? Did you like when I took 400 damage and died, chat? That was something. That was a choice. So, I don't know. Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those games I'm just not going to miss. Like, we fought, Oh no, was Abaddon the Flame Demon? Whatever the Flame Demon was. No, Abaddon had to have been the conductor. The Flame Demon. When we fought the Flame Demon, that boss did so much damage to us, it felt like I like skipped difficulties. That was another one where the patterns weren't hard, but I took like, what was it, like 200 damage or something by bonking his hand or the flame? It was some crazy amount when I had less than 500 health. I was healing like every other time I got hit, or I would die otherwise. Welcome, Shaky. Hope you're doing well. We're basically venting / final thoughting Donasaro. Definitely not going to miss this game. I am curious about the other games. I've played Portrait of Ruin, and I had mostly positive things to say about it. So we'll see how I feel about it revisiting it in the future. We might save that for next year. We'll see. But yeah, I'm just not going to miss these dungeons or the bosses. I don't feel like I feel really beholden to them. Well, I think some of the Aria bosses were kind of lackluster. Like, there was the Golem that had, like, really crazy, dumb hitboxes you needed to strike, or hurt boxes, I mean. I just felt like the bosses were more fun to fight in Aria, comparatively. Like, the boss fights were hard because they were challenging patterns, but not impossible. Like, Chaos and Julius, for example, were very difficult bosses, and maybe that'll turn some people off because they were intentionally hard bosses. This game, it's more hard due to just jank BS. Like, just don't. It's not like it's like we dodge the same way, but we happen to be like a pixel off, and then he might punish us randomly because the boss will jump upwards and anti-air us for no reason. So, I don't know. I feel like this game could have been cooked a little longer in development. Maybe that would have fixed some issues with it. But so far, chat, I'm willing to say this might be my least favorite Castlevania. The only thing I didn't like about Circle of the Moon was the final boss, and that boss was very polarizing, and I did not enjoy fighting it. But if we had to say play all the way up to basically the final boss, except excluding the final boss, I would rather play Circle again. Because I do feel like I had fun with Circle on certain modes. And I feel like the randomizer of Circle in particular fixes basically all my issues with the game, where instead of getting stupid HP ups or hard ups after going into like exploration areas, it actually replaces it with equipment or cards. Like, I feel like that fixed the major issue with the game. Whereas in this one, I don't know what I would do to fix it. This is one of those ones where I just feel like it's so fundamentally flawed, I don't even know where to give a suggestion to even be constructive with the criticism. Other than start with soul drop rates. Scrap the relationship between Hammer and the other characters, that was terrible. Please buff Julius in Julius mode. Rethink enemies being able to just fall down randomly into other areas. Yeah, redo a lot of enemy positions throughout the game, in particular Guest House. Whatever the place was next to Cursed Tower itself. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like we're going into, like, new territory. New plot, new castle, no seals. Yeah, it's like the castle itself was actually not terrible. It's just that, like, when there were dead ends, there were no rewards. And then, like, when you went down the mine area, where, like, literally every other room was a dead end with an enemy at the bottom, but no items, just felt dumb. It's just like, why even bother exploring? There's no point. You're not gonna get any items. Will I play Ecclesia? Maybe. I remember not liking Ecclesia. I gave up pretty early in my Ecclesia playthrough. So if we do it, I will probably tap out of the playthrough at some point. I think the issue with games like that, I don't like the soul collecting, but I think with Ecclesia compared to like an Aria or a Dawn, it was reminding me way too much of Classicvania, and I did not like Classicvania. Like, I will not go back and play willingly the first, like, 4 Castlevania. I might watch them be played, and, you know, have a decent time, but emphasis on platforming or just really long hallways with no exploration is, like, a complete turn-off for me in a game. Like, the whole point of playing games like this is to explore. And when dungeons in that kind of game are literally just like 7 tiles in a row, or it's like it's a long hallway, but then there's like a circle of rooms around the main hallway, and it's like 9 total rooms beyond that. It's like, no, I think they fix it towards the end of that game, and I won't go into spoiler territory, but they eventually go to the map design that I'm looking for. But if I have to play and beat the whole game just to see the map design I'm looking for, I don't know. That to me just doesn't make sense. I don't see the point in playing a game for like 5 to 8 hours just to be like, oh, here's the thing I wanted since hour 1. I don't know. We might give it a shot. Maybe some of the middle dungeons are better, but yeah. Was definitely not a fan of that one for sure, and I gave up after a while. I'll probably play Portrait of Ruin though after this. I think it is going more in the way that I was hoping that Dawn would go, so maybe, you know, stick around for the future and you'll get to see what I was looking for a balance between the previous game, which I thought was actually really good, and kind of taking it in a different direction with more grinding, but in a way that feels more natural is the best way to put it, where they figured out that people don't like collecting multiple of the souls, that there has to be other ways to deal with empowering something over time. And I think they fixed that mechanic for the most part in the later games. But yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate that this one is kind of like the stepping stone. And I just feel no real desire to ever touch this game again, randomizer, mod, or otherwise. Whereas like in the future, I would be more inclined to play like an Aria, or I would be inclined to play the Portrait of Ruin randomizer. I think I would actually enjoy it from what I remember of the game. It's long, unless I choose options to reduce the number of bosses we fight. But I remember having a better time in Portrait for sure. So I don't know. This game is kind of like the ugly stepchild kind of thing. It's there. I guess it did things for the series, maybe. Maybe we'll see mechanics from this game used in the other ones. Like unfun flying forms. I remember Portrait of Ruin being kind of punishing with the flying form. But fortunately it wasn't like required for bosses like it was in this one. So you didn't have to suffer through the jank. But anyway, chat, I think we're digressing from the final thoughts of the game. So if anybody wants to give any final thoughts for their personal, I guess, viewer observations, spoiler or non-spoiler. I guess the endings were okay. The ban ending was nice. The normal ending was like, oh, I guess I'll let them deal with it. Then it never concludes. Wait, you just learn nothing in the normal ending of the game. You're like, oh, Alucard will take care of it now. Bye. We just leave. We don't even go for like, and then we lived happily ever after, or no, we met up with somebody, or they never were seen again. They're just gone. It's certainly a choice. But anyway, chat, I think that's enough of the game. This won't be a game I'll ever be playing. I mean, pretty much. Sorry to be that person. This game is just not worth it. Maybe if you really have heavily mod it, it would be a lot of fun. But the core game is just not. It just doesn't work. Numbers are mistuned. Enemy placement is weird. Bosses are either ultra brain dead or randomly punishing to the point where you die in like 2 hits or 3 hits. It's not a really great balance in between. It definitely felt like it was all over the place with difficulty throughout the game. Like, funny enough, fighting the Demon Lord candidates, I think they were the easiest bosses in the game outside of literally the starting boss, which is really weird because they're like midway through the game. You would have thought they would have been like way more challenging combat-wise. Like, poor Dimitri, we threw like, what, a single bone at him and he got completely defeated? I think we legitimately no-damaged that boss fight. And that was like a decent way into the game as a reminder. So, it is what it is. But I think for now, chat, we're gonna say goodbye to Donosaro. Never touching it again. Goodbye, Donosaro. Be gone. Those are my final thoughts. So if you joined us to this point in the final thoughts, hopefully you'll join us again in more fun Castlevania games. Yeah, this will be one I don't recommend, and kind of glad it's not available in other forms. Not worth it, chat. Not worth it.